Hey, it's Chase from On the Table Gaming, and today we're talking about the hobby side of gaming and mental health, including the benefits and sometimes the negatives. Now, before we get started here, it's important to remember that nothing we share today is intended to be medical advice or diagnosis. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health provider. If you're in a crisis or you think you may have an emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. If you're having suicidal thoughts, call 1-800-273-TALK. To talk to a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area. And that's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We'll have links in the descriptions below. And if you're located outside of the United States, call your local emergency line immediately. So with that being said, I'm really excited to be joined by these two hobby legends, Duncan Rhodes of the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy and Scott the Miniature Maniac. Thank you both for coming on to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. It's going to be fun.
And, while sitting down with the two of you would be a great day, any day, I'm also joined today by Dr. Alta Pont, a mood and anxiety disorder postdoctoral fellow. So Alta, thanks so much for coming on as well.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this today with y'all.
So full disclosure, Alta is my sister. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. In case anyone starts to get suspicious that I'm starting to shill for big therapy here. So we'll go in from there. But let's jump in here and explore before we get into actual mental health and exploring that topic in more depth. Let's talk a little bit about wargaming and the hobby in general. Why miniatures over board games or video games? What in particular has hooked us into miniature wargaming? So for me, coming into this hobby, I think, I really enjoy board games, video games, books, art, all of those facets. But I think miniature wargaming itself has a certain appeal, and that it's got like this holy trifecta of like hobby, lore, and gaming combined. So I really enjoy not only playing with miniatures, playing the games themselves and painting, but there's that social aspect as well. And then being able to sit in solitude and like work on the mastery aspect of painting. That's really what's like hooked me about this hobby in general. And it keeps me coming back. Duncan, how about you? What's drawn you into miniature gaming in particular?
I think it's, for me, it's a good way to express creativity in that it's a very personal thing because you kind of put a bit of your soul into everything that you're painting, everything that you're making. And it becomes that very unique collection that you put together. That's yours, it's your very own thing. And so you develop a sense of attachment to it. It's not like if you're playing like a strategy game on a PC or anything where an army is kind of, just the same things every time and there's nothing tangible about them. In the case of miniatures, it's definitely something that you create. And then you take that and you interact with other people with it. So on one hand, you've got this kind of personal experience that you go through in making your collection. And then you have the social aspect where you meet up with people. And because the game kind of becomes a bit like a role-playing game in some sense, and you get these shared experiences with it, I find that you start to get these very strong connections with people as you're doing it. So for myself, all of my close friends I've met through wargaming through one way or another, which certainly hasn't been intentional, as I've been, doing it for a career, I guess. But it means that I've made very, very good friends, and we all share this connection where we can all geek out about miniatures. So yeah, I think that's what hooked me in and draws me into it, but it allows me to be sort of have that private time of doing the thing where I can be an introvert and doing that thing. But then I can also, relax with friends at the same time. So that's why I think it hooks me.
Awesome. I think for me, I'm going to have a similar answer to all of you guys, but maybe getting there from a different path. So like it does satisfy multiple things in my personality. My parents introduced things like Star Trek and Lord of the Rings to me at a very young age. And so there's this fantasy sci-fi element that's super, super fun for me. I love the crunchy competitive nature of the games. I got into like competitive esports at a very young age as well. And so there's a lot of that back and forth, a lot of analysis of how you can play, how you can build a list better, which is super fun. And everyone in my family seems to have some kind of creative talent they had, and I didn't really feel like I had any at a young age. I couldn't draw, I couldn't sculpt, I couldn't do anything that my sisters could do, but this I could do. And so it felt like I was like a real Walter child once I finally figured out what my creative talent was. So all three things just come together to be like a very efficient, enjoyable hobby.
And so, we're going to be talking about mental health today. And that term is kind of a broad term. And so Alta maybe kind of being our expert, maybe not on the painting side yet, although I did dig out some of your old Bretonia miniatures. I forced her to paint miniatures with me when I was a kid, when I got super into the hobby. And I do have some of those we have to revisit. But for talking about mental health then, what do we mean when we say mental health?
Yeah, mental health is actually really difficult to define. I think a lot of us, when we say mental health, what we mean is mental health disorder, right? Things like depression or PTSD. And that is really important because I was actually looking yesterday at some research, and it's kind of old. It's from 2005, but it was talking about the lifetime prevalence of mental health disorders in the US. And the takeaway was that 50% of people in the US will meet criteria for mental health diagnosis at some point in their lifetime, which is crazy if you think about it. That's so many people. But mental health is a lot more than a diagnosis, right? Like mental health can mean so many other things. I think for me, it's really about like your ability to navigate stress and like engage in your life in a meaningful way and connect with other people who are important to you. There are many things that can contribute and make somebody like mentally healthy.
Sometimes I'll hear people say things like, wargaming is like my therapy. When we're talking about that, like, what's the difference between something being like therapeutic and actual therapy? Is that maybe a point we should look at before we talk about some of these things further?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to me, at least, a lot of like hobbies, exercise, things like that can be very therapeutic. Absolutely. And I do like to differentiate that from therapy or mental health, like professional mental health treatment. Because for a lot of people who are struggling with, say, major depressive disorder, like hobbying can be a really important part of coming out of that, but it's often not enough, right? And so it makes me think of, I was reading this interview with lead singer of Counting Crows for some reason the other day. And he was saying that, like, he has a long history struggling with mental health issues. And for him, if you took 2 days and you had one day where you're horribly depressed and another day where you're horribly depressed, but you wrote a song, like, which would you pick?
Yeah, I suppose you'd always pick the version of yourself where you're at least being creative.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. Maybe that's because we feel the need to have something to show for ourselves, right? It's like I need to be productive. If I'm not being productive, I'm not being a human being in my own mind, right? Which maybe that is a little bit of an unhealthy thought even. But yeah, that's an interesting distinguishing kind of choice right there.
You bring that productivity. There's a lot of jokes in the hobby, actually, like your pile of shame. You might find yourself even trapped under plastic if there's so much. When we're talking about gaming and mental health, right? Whether it's our emotional well-being in general or it's specific diagnosed situations. What has been the experience that we've all had with that interplay? Like, what has been your experience with gaming and mental health? And with that in mind, like, why might talking about mental health be important to you? Scott, maybe that's something you could start us off with.
Yeah. I can give like both a personal response to that and also kind of like how I've experienced it through other people's perspective. So I can almost guarantee that Duncan has gotten similar messages like this, but I've gotten messages from people who tell me my videos help them with their mental disorders. The one that's most impactful to me is whenever I hear from a soldier that my videos help with PTSD. I've heard that maybe 4 or 5 times. And that's so meaningful to me. I don't understand how the dumb things I do in a video can help with something as serious as that. But that's always so cool to hear and experience. From my own personal perspective regarding things like the hobby pile of shame or like your backlog. I've never really experienced much stress about that. I like everything about the hobby. I love the collector aspect. I love the creative aspect. And so when I see a model that I think is really cool and I can visualize a story and a paint scheme for, I'm going to buy it without really much consideration for what I haven't painted yet in my life. Not feel too bad about that. It gets a little interesting when like you want to play a game in front of an online audience and a portion of your army isn't painted and people give you crap for that. But that's another story.
Duncan, how about you?
I can confirm similar things to what Scott mentioned in that it's really weird to like, it's very strange to get your head around it when because like when I started doing all this stuff at Games Workshop like way back, it never occurred to me that I'd get these kind of messages. I thought everyone was going to hate me because like people weren't very friendly towards Games Workshop at that time. And I thought I'd get all of it at me because I was the only face being associated. Well, yeah, I was the only one the company was presenting at the time. And the complete reverse happened. So I was getting similar things like, you'd get messages from soldiers where they say they're going through something and just painting the miniatures and helping to understand how to do it helps them through that. And we got a message one day from this chap who was going through bereavement, and he was painting, I believe it was Skitari. He got into painting those, and he sent a message saying that he'd been following the videos, and it felt like someone was there helping him when he was at his lowest. And then a few months later, I got sent over to the Nova Open. And as I was walking around, I bumped into him. And of course, I had no idea what he looked like, but he was there at a painting desk in this little hobby area. And he suddenly leaps up and comes running over and introduces, and I sent this message about this. It completely floored me because it's suddenly having that directly in your face telling you this effect that you've helped someone. It's a really powerful feeling. And going on, I've become aware that this sort of thing happens. I think it's wonderful that people can help each other in this sort of way. And it's something I can find a little bit overwhelming at times, to be honest, because you want to give your best. But like, you can sort of like get that little nagging, like, it's not good enough, and you can start driving yourself crazy, I think. When it comes to the painting stuff, for a personal aspect that I found difficult to deal with is people kind of putting me on a pedestal of, hearing memes and jokes and things like that, but it kind of becomes this reinforcing thing of Duncan's the best painter in the world, and that's just straight up not true. But people expect it of you, and you're like, I can't do that. Like, that's not what I do. And that can be a tricky thing to navigate at times. But I've always found just being open about it as, like, people understand, I guess, when you talk to them, of like, oh, this is how I feel about all these sorts of things. I think people seem to appreciate it. I think the openness of it.
I think it's kind of interesting for me to be here talking about this because I think my experience is maybe on the other side where, it's really interesting about gaming and mental health in that there are so many aspects, there are social aspects that I find like that really are nurturing about gaming. Like I do the painting and stuff in Solitude, and then I go and I play these games with other people and I be part of a real community. And I'm part of these like imagined communities. I'm part of the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, and like I don't sit with a group of people in person, or I watch Scott your videos and I know other people who watch your videos, and it's like a bond we have, but we don't have like an official fan club yet for you guys, but like, it's not like we're meeting in like places together to congregate. But I think the term's like parasocial, where it's like I'm an audience participating in your community. And so, on a stressful day for me, I might come home, and if I'm having a bad day, I can sit down at the painting table and I can pull up a video. And actually, I've honestly like watched videos sometimes, like even when I'm not painting this exact thing, like just put it on the background, and I'm like part of your communities. And it's like a friendship. And maybe that's what you guys are speaking to. Like people come up to us, like it's almost feels like I know you. I got a little nervous at the start of the podcast because you're both here, and it's like I kind of know you, but you don't know me. It's like, hey, like it feels creepy. Like I've been listening to you, I've been watching you, or like But one of the other things that happens for me that's been really helpful in this hobby is that I can develop mastery and in particular with you two, the painting component, it can sit down and it helps me isolate things down and narrow things down into baby steps in various ways, where it's like, it can be sometimes a bigger topic that's like an essay format, like an idea, and breaks it down and can be entertaining. But I sit down at the painting table and whatever's going on in my life, like, well, right now what matters is like my miniature. I'm gonna pick up my brush, and then it's like, hey, we're gonna start by, applying this color, or it's like, watching video being like, here's the theory behind why I'm doing this. And I'm like able to break into manageable pieces. And I think that speaks to like, it's a skill or a strategy, I guess, that I end up using that helps me regulate or deal with whatever emotions I'm having during the day. And so maybe I'm coming at my experience with gaming and mental health as the person that is like benefiting from what you're doing. And I don't know, maybe Alta, is there something like related to distress tolerance, like in the actual act of breaking things down into these pieces and having like people who give like instructional or like at least informative content that is also entertaining or helpful?
I mean, absolutely. It's really cool for me to hear y'all share. So I'm new to this world. This is not like I watched some of y'all's videos before this just to be like, who are these people?
I carefully curated some of these though, Scott, so don't worry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Which is great. And I like really hear the balance that you'll have to strike between like the idea of who you are and like being a human being that is obviously flawed just like the rest of us. And I can imagine the immense pressure to perform and also how like those moments of vulnerability when you maybe are human and leave half of the board unpainted, how that could also be in an interesting way, like very validating for other people who may be in the same boat.
Yeah, I think you do have these, there are plenty of moments where you kind of like worried about, is something going to work? We can be making a video on a given week, and I'll have tested 100 times what I'm going to be doing. I know what I'm talking about, but you still think to yourself, oh, if this doesn't work, if this doesn't look bad, what do we do then? Because you want the advice that you give to be genuine and to actually, serve a purpose and help somebody. But if it's not working out, then all right, so we've got to redo this. And suddenly that cuts into time, which then starts to mess up your schedule for what you need to make and things. So even, like I say, you've done it 100 times, you know what you're doing. You still think to yourself, oh, what if this goes wrong? You can always hear that little voice, well, I can, little voice at the back of my head, even after all these years. But then on the other hand, when you do the thing and it works, you get this enormous sense of, oh, thank God, it's not gone wrong today. So I think everyone has these moments, these like vulnerabilities. I imagine it's the case in most things. Like maybe an airplane pilot when they're about to land a plane. Man, I hope I get this right.
That's not.
When you put it in that perspective, it's not that big a deal getting a patent technique wrong, is it?
Do you feel like, has it, I make videos and I really enjoy creating, and I really look up to you both. Does it get easier? Like the amount of time you've made so many videos and they're so great. And like, does each video get easier? It's just like, oh, you're building up mastery, and eventually it's like, I used to struggle tying my shoes a long time ago. And then I kept doing it. And now like, I don't even have to look, I can tie my shoes. Like, is it just a thing about like, say maybe with painting, is it just a matter of time? And then you somehow reach some like mythical plateau where it's like, there's a little voice, there's nervous there, but like, I don't know, at the risk of sounding invalidating, like a lot of times I see your stuff and it's hard for me to tell what maybe is the content you're putting out that you feel like was rushed and not great. And the content, there's obviously content is great, but like, I don't always maybe see this huge gulf on my end. So maybe two parts there. But is the first part like, does it get easier? Scott, like you've been making videos for a long time. Like, is it easier now?
So that was a validating thing for you to say that you don't notice a huge discrepancy in quality. I feel like my last video, there were several things about it that I was upset with, but I had to put it out because I wanted to put out a video during my campaign. But I kind of, decided to lower the quality on several other things to be able to get it out on that schedule. so it depends on the kind of person you are. I see myself as a person who's enthusiastic about the video creation as well as the painting creation. And so I am never really happy to just coast. Whenever I figure out a comfortable video process, I'm always trying to change it. Which is why if you look at my videos over the course of the last 6 years, they've changed not only in theme, but also in tone and pacing and how much of it is education, how much of it's entertainment. Like these things all flux because that keeps it fun and exciting for me. But the downside of that is that it is almost always a challenge because you're never really operating in your wheelhouse. And when you are, it's boring. So to answer your question, it doesn't really get easier for me. And for painting, for people who are listening to this, if you're like a display painter or just someone who's trying to get better at painting in general, you will often notice, well, you'll often get better while painting a project. And then by the end of the project, you'll be like, well, I'm better than what this end result suggests. So I almost want to redo this thing I just painted. And it's like, okay, you can't do that because you'll never finish a model. So it's like, it's both things. Like you're getting better constantly. So you always know you're better at what you're accomplishing at the moment. And also, if you're always trying to change things up, you're never going to be a pro at what you're doing. So you're always going to feel like you're a noob. So yeah, those two things are interplaying.
Man, so if what I'm kind of hearing then is, I guess the hope is in like, if the things don't change, if it's always challenging, then do we have to like change around that? So is it like, do you feel like the other skills that we can put into play that make it easier is like, we have to just navigate those emotions? Like, I guess you can't stop the waves, but like somehow you've learned to surf and like, you know, when people follow, right. Fair enough. But I guess like, you know, what goes into like, how could we be more skillful about navigating those spaces? I guess I feel that way. And, you know, I work on videos and I'll somehow oftentimes maybe sacrifice getting things out because I want to be like perfect. And then even when I get it out, it's not perfect. And like, are there ways to manage that more skillfully? I guess same thing with painting. Maybe, you know, jumping ahead here a little bit, but like I have a lot of games I play. One of them is Marvel Crisis Protocol. And I actually don't play it that much because I don't paint the miniatures because for some reason, I can paint up all my free folk. I have Warhammer miniatures. I've got these cool Perry Napoleonics I'm painting up. And like, it's a blast. But when it comes to these, I get this one miniature in a box. And it's not just like, you know, random Napoleonic brigadier dude. It's a superhero. And like, I've seen them in movies and like, I've read the comics and like, I want to make sure I get it right. And like, I'll look up a bunch of people's tutorials and they're still in the box, a lot of them. And like, I was like, I'm going to do it better. And like, I opened them up and I assembled a bunch. And I just can't get to, for some reason, paint this particular miniature. Do you guys have that? Like, Duncan, have you ever had a miniature that you felt like you just couldn't start, or like there's some barrier there?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So that's, I get that feeling to some extent or another whenever it's a figure where it's a depiction of something like in a movie or TV, like I guess you're saying like Marvel superheroes. For things like Warhammer, not really, because I kind of, you know, like there's always set things in the studio. I was learning these set things and how they do them. But when it comes to painting something like that, when you're trying to replicate it as close as you can, definitely. I certainly experienced that a lot with my Elder Scrolls miniatures. So for Modifius's game, from that, trying to get, because you know what things look like in Skyrim, right? Everything's brown, all these different shades of brown in the outfits, and so there I am trying to work out these minute different shades of brown on things. And I had to stop myself after a while. Like, it doesn't matter, like as long as it's close, because when the lighting conditions in the game changes, all those things change anyway. It's the same with superheroes, depending on how, you know, the lighting they're depicted in, the shades of red, blue, whatever, are always going to be different. I had a similar thing just the other night. So I ended up painting some of the miniatures from Another Glorious Day in the Core. So this game on aliens that came out, right? I've got some of the xenomorphs, and I was like, right, I paint a xenomorph. They're just black, right? But you see so many people depicting them over time with metallics and things that I've started winding myself up in knots as to how I was going to paint these things, and they're only one color. And I managed to work my way through it. And then I was like, having a go with some varnishes to make them look shiny and stuff, and I wasn't liking what was going on. And I had to just like, you know what, you start again, do it all again. calm down, it's all right. And just, how would you do it? Don't worry about what anyone else or all these depictions of things. You know, I was looking like that, just try and do that. And then I was much calmer about it and just followed through, and then happy with the result. So I think what I'm getting at there is sort of acknowledging when you're tying yourself up in knots about it, because that is the barrier. It's just like any other miniature. You start it the same way, same sort of techniques. And it's easier to paint it, and if you're not happy with it, change things, than it is to not have ever started. You know what I mean? Like, to go back and work on it, and you can always adjust things if you want to, I think. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing y'all talk about like things getting easier or not. In some ways, it's just making me think of like how we define easier, right? Because it sounds like for you, Scott, like a lot of the challenges is really just becoming comfortable tolerating discomfort in some way. And just like,
That's so sad.
well, really like an amazing skill. And I think that like that it seems like it's really important, right? Because ideally we're all challenging ourselves in all kinds of ways. And I'm curious if maybe the part that gets easier is the doing it anyways, even though you're uncomfortable or worried about it or not sure if it's going to be just so.
Yeah. One thing I didn't touch on that I bet Duncan knows about and other hobbyists also know about is that when you get more comfortable with the process, you tend to add more things onto that process, right? So it's like, okay, I know how to paint a unit. Now I'm going to paint a display model. Okay, I know how to paint a display model. Now I'm going to like paint or convert a model of my army and paint it super nicely. And so it's like the more you're comfortable with doing, the more you're willing to experiment and expand your skill set. And so for Duncan and myself, maybe it's like, okay, we know how to make videos. We know how to make one video a week. Okay, can we also do a live stream? Can we also do a podcast? Can we also run a Kickstarter campaign? And then you get to this certain point where it's like, holy cow, I keep adding things onto my plate, but time never expands magically. And so I'm just like, I feel like I am butter spread over too much bread, to quote Bilbo. So yeah, the same thing with a hobby is like, you can just really get in over your head because the more you play the game, you're involved in the hobby, the more you want to try out different games, which involve different challenges, new experiences, but it can almost get a little too much at one point because you just have so many things going on in your hobby life.
Yeah, I think that's especially true if you end up playing lots of different things, and so you never actually finish anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
Too many games, too many skirmish games. What the heck?
Yeah,
I thought the skirmish games was the solution. I thought that was to scale it down to skirmish games.
That's right. I've been trying to be good in focusing on the games I actually play more recently, and it's difficult because I've always been pulled in lots of different directions. And I imagine, Scott, you must get this of like people wanting you to paint their miniatures and things, and you want to help out and do this different stuff, but you get to a point where there's just so many just single figures from all kinds of things, and at the end, like, oh, cool, I'm going to play that game. Well, I've got 20 miniatures, but they're not for the same army, so I can't use them. And it just you start thinking, have I wasted my time? What am I doing this for? And you can like go nuts with it. Which certainly burned me out a little bit during all the lockdowns that were happening. Definitely, kind of like put all this time into painting stuff, and then I was at the end of it, and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing this for?
I'm wondering for all of you, really, if I can ask, like when you feel burnt out or like when you feel like you're spread too thin, like how do you know? And what are the signs for you that like, oh, this is too much?
I think I don't want to do my job anymore. I think if I wake up and I'm like, I get up pretty early. I like to work early in the morning because no one's awake. If I get up at 5, or if I don't even want to get up at 5, I'm like, okay, this is a problem now. If I'm not like interested in my job that I quit my professional career for, that is like the end all be all, something is wrong here. That's how I know.
For me, it's when I just don't want to paint anything, or I can't get any motivation to do it. And the work thing's different because so I work closely with my friend Roger, who I've been doing this stuff with Games Workshop for all these years up till now. So the two of us have a very good working relationship. So I've got to provide the content, because he's there to film it, and we've got an employee as well, so we have to do it. So that's always felt like a very distinct, separate thing for me. But when it comes to in my own time, if I'm just sat there looking at these models and I just can't motivate myself, then I know I've got an issue at that point. And it's time to go and do something else for a bit.
Yeah.
This sounds terrible, but hearing that Duncan Rhodes has moments when he doesn't want to paint makes me feel more okay, because that I definitely experienced that.
Yeah, well, it happened in 2020. So when the lockdown happened, I was like, time to get some stuff painted. You know what I mean? So like, and I leapt into it, and the Final Fantasy remake video game was coming out, and I loved playing that when I was a kid. So I wanted to finish my Targaryen box before that came out. So I powered through painting all the Dothraki and everything, did that, played the game, amazing. Right, okay, so I did really well finishing that set. I ought to do another one. So I threw myself into my Night's Watch, and there was also some War Machine stuff I painted around then as well. And there was some historical stuff I dabbled with, some World War II and things. And I just suddenly crashed. And I was like, because I was just painting all this stuff, and then it would go in the box, and that'd be it. And I wasn't seeing anybody because no one could. So I wasn't doing anything with it. And I just realized I was just, when you're trying to finish a project, Scott, right? And you're trying to get it done by a certain time, and you sort of start to stress yourself and trying to get it finished. And then you're like, oh, there we go, brilliant. I was just doing that again and again. And I just kind of hit a point like, why am I doing that? And I just sort of stopped. And I'd paint occasional things, but I wasn't finishing any real thing. And it didn't really come back, my motivation to paint anything in a big way, until I got chatting to some friends who I do reenactment with. And we were all like, oh, it'd be cool to have something to look forward to once things go back to normal. And one of them wanted to play old school Epic 40K. And one of them wanted to do World War II. And I was like, why don't we sort of put these together? And so we decided to do Flames of War. So like small World War II. And painted up a little army for that. And then seeing them and playing that game, it was just like back. And all of a sudden I'm like, I want to paint loads of this stuff. And I had a reason to do it because I was looking forward to seeing my friends again and like going, look at this cool thing. I made an objective marker. It's a truck. Like just wanting to do stuff like that and just nerding out about it and learning about, because I didn't really know much about World War II. So I was learning about the difference between like a Panzer III and a Panzer IV and all this sort of stuff. And it was like sort of like suddenly breathing again. Which sounds a little bit dramatic, but it was nice to get that feeling. And so that's kind of reinforced for me that, like, why are you painting these models? Well, it's because I want to have fun with my friends, but I'm also an introvert, so I get to have that time alone painting the thing, but there's a purpose to it. I think it sort of underlined that aspect for me. I don't know if you have similar feelings about it, Scott, but
absolutely, yeah. When you said that, you said it kind of a while back, and I thought of something immediately. I had a period in my career where I was just painting sponsored videos, like back to back to back to back, which is like the best kind of ad for a company when you paint their model that someone can go out and buy right now. But I realized you had the same thing. You said it out loud. It was like, I have painted 20 models in a row that are not for a game I care about, and I'm not using it. It's go in my cabinet and they just exist in there. And it's like, what is my hobby? Is my hobby just painting models for other people? And so I discovered A Song of Ice and Fire at that point with my roommate Curtis, and we just loved that game. And I had the exact same experience as you. I started to get excited about things that were just like almost adjacent to the hobby. I made a tabletopper for A Song of Ice and Fire. I started getting super excited about casting like custom sea bases for my Greyjoy army. And I was just like, I was painting models, not on camera, not on stream, just for like my own enjoyment. And I totally feel that feeling of, okay, holy cow, I'm a normal person again. I'm not doing this for a buck. I'm just doing it and no one's watching. And it's like, I'm like 12 again. So I totally get that feeling you shared.
That video was my favorite one that you've made, because I really enjoyed that because it was very heartfelt. It caught my attention when it popped up. I was actually I was at the grand tournament for Ice and Fire. It was the night in between the 2 days of the event where I saw it pop up on my YouTube recommended, and I found it very very honest. If that makes sense, that and it was actually nice to see you feeling things that I could recognize in what you were saying. And it was cool that you'd done it in that game too. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like it's a genuine good game and he's doing it because he likes it. I think it's I don't think people get it with the content creation side of things because it is your job doing it, and obviously you're into it, but you also have your own hobby and you want to be able to do that too. So I loved it. It was great.
Thank you.
What you two are describing really reminds me of this idea of burnout cycles. So the idea just being that, like, for most of us, burnout is kind of a part of life, and that we'll go through these cycles of burnout. And it sounds like for you two, the way that you've gotten through that is connecting with like what's important to you, like your values, like why you started doing this in the first place, and also with connecting with other people who are also jazzed about, the hobby.
Totally true.
Yeah,
So-
I think so.
So if I'm like mindful of not trying to, like, it seems like weird to be like, how do you like cheat the system? There's like a way to like formula, like be like, well, burnout's going to happen, then we do this, and then we can do more. Like, I don't want to like feed into a thing that is unhealthy, and like just trying to find ways to enable to put more on our plates. Is part of this then trying to then nurture those communities? Like, is that a way to prevent burnout, or is burnout like inevitable and you just need to know how to like pick up the pieces? Like, is there a preventative thing that we could be prescribing to, or is there more of like, we got to be looking for like the Band-Aid at the end that's here's how you fix things, or is it fixable like that, I guess? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you think, Duncan?
So it's a funny thing because that pressure to get a thing done, I think, is always going to be there to some extent. Because if you're painting an army, there's always going to be that unit where it's like, oh, I can't be bothered to finish them, but I need to finish them because you want to have that thing. I remember with old 40k stuff, the troops tax, painting your troop squads, and sometimes it can feel like a slog and things. That can just be a part of it. I think it's a different feeling though when you're just lacking the motivation to do anything. And you can always cut corners if that's the unit you don't want to paint. You don't have to make them amazing. I think you could end up piling it on too much. And if you're feeling that way throughout the whole army, you probably want to be asking, why am I doing that army in the end? Because I think there is always a personal thing that attracts you to a particular collection. So you always need to kind of keep in the back of your mind why you're doing that collection. Why do you like them? I like my Lannisters because they look pretty, and I like the way they play with all the dirty tricks. Okay, so that's what it's about. So I should sort of gravitate. Exactly, yeah, I'm that kind of guy. So gravitate towards the things that interest you. I do think you can largely avoid it by just doing those miniatures and troops in the collection that you like. But yeah, it does happen sometimes. It's also like a tournament tradition, having that night before the tournament, trying to rapidly finish things. Yeah. You got any thoughts, Scott?
Yeah. Well, I thought I was going to ask you to play a game of Song of Ice and Fire, Adepticon, but now I know you're a Lannister player.
Yeah, that's right. I'll have a hand of 5 cards just ready, psyching you out.
Oh, gosh.
Right. None of them counterplot, but I'm like, yeah.
Oh, God, not counterplot. No.
Right here.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that. So I think what in my head, my theory on how to solve this issue of never experiencing burnout again is to have total knowledge and control over knowing what you are able to accomplish in a set amount of time. So it's like, okay, like this is bringing me back to like my software engineering days of like Scrum meetings and like having Jira boards where it's like, okay, in a week, a full-time employee can be assigned 30 points of work, and then 10 points, which is like a point is an hour, is like for extra stuff, right? So it's like, as a YouTuber, as a hobbyist, it's like, okay, I can have 2 games on my plate at one point. And if I decide to bring on a third, I need to get rid of one of these games so that I can have the bandwidth to live my normal hobby life and live my normal life as well without feeling stressed out or pulled in one too many directions. So if you are very intimately aware of what you are able to accomplish as a person, as a hobbyist, and you're like very mature about like what to get rid of and what to add, I think you would never experience burnout. But the thing is that everyone is constantly learning how much work their hobbies or their tasks are going to take them to do while they're doing them. And so it's like not something you figure out until after the fact and you are already burnt out. So that's my idea. It's like constantly trying to hone in on how much time you have to do the things you want to do.
I think that's a very good advice. I like that, having the rule of 2 things.
Yeah, so, something like that. Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
Do you feel like the nature of content creation mixed with the hobby though, like is the thing that makes it so hard to maintain that? Because there is like a weird, like never ending possibility for growth out there, right? Like, especially for YouTube, because you are actively involved in expanding the hobby and bringing more people in. And I realize even in saying that, that like adds another point of pressure. And like people see your stuff and like, I've shown your videos just that are even funny, like, or to be like, hey, like, check this out. And they're like, well, this is actually kind of cool. Like they're more like board gamers. They'd be like, oh, maybe I'll paint up some of my board game sort of miniatures. And like, well, if I picked up one of those miniatures, I might try and do that too. And then Duncan Rhodes, yours are often very like, especially beginner friendly, being like, hey, if you're stepping in for the first time, like, here you go. But like it's sort of like an insatiable, like you could make, you said, I make this many videos a week, I'm going to do 2 more or make 3 more. If you made X, 10 videos a day, people would still be like, great. Like, yeah. Like how
I'll watch this, sure.
Right. You know what I mean? But like, and is the nature that there's no way you could fulfill the hunger there is for content out there. Does that add like an extra stressor, or like, is there any way that you guys have found like maybe liberation in the idea that like, hey, if you put out a video a week or a video a month, even people would still be clamoring for it and think that's great?
Yeah, I think you need to be okay with leaving things on the table. That was something that I learned at a very young YouTuber-y age, is that there are so many opportunities making books, making TikTok content, making Instagram shorts, like doing a class, like being involved in someone's collaboration. The list is endless. And every opportunity is a valid opportunity for growth, and it's your business and it's how you make money. And so it feels very uncomfortable when Instagram's like, here's several $100s to make Instagram shorts. Do it now. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. So it feels really bad to leave those kinds of opportunities on the table. But I think learning how to do that is really important for not getting burnt out or not feeling like, you're doing too many things.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think if you end up saying yes to every request that comes along, you'll just, you can't do it all. There's just not enough time in the day. Yeah, and you'd like to, certainly. So, like it's meaningful to people, I think, to be like using your time for these sorts of things. But yeah, just the realities of life. Like, you got to do other things. You've got to spend time with your family, for example. You've got to do all this stuff, so you can't just spend 24 hours a day working on content, I think. Yeah.
You got to spend time with your cute little pug dog.
Little Gizmo.
Yes.
Oh, he's got teeth like needles.
No.
He's shedding so much hair. I got into my car the other day and there's hair inside my car. He's never been in there.
So maybe we'll get to see him on one of your future painting videos. We're like, is that a piece of hair on the miniature there?
Yeah. I found one in the pallet the other day.
Yeah.
I found blessed. So he's only I don't know, 6 months old or something, but he loves chasing stuff. And I found that every now and then he'll try and chase his tail. And if I just hold this, because it curls up, if I just sort of curl it and sort of like lean it around the side, you'll see it and then go for it. So at will, I can make him chase his tail.
There's your metaphor there. Good guy.
It's really
There's
mean, but he has so much fun.
I saw that.
Oh yes,
the video on Instagram, right? Yeah, I watched that video.
Yeah, he's he's lovely. He barks in the background and stuff sometimes, and he's often a nightmare. So he's got this. He's got into rhythm. So at lunchtime, we'll sat having lunch and stuff, and I'll be eating, and he watches for when I finish my food and I've put it back in the kitchen, and then he knows it's battle time, and he runs off and he finds a toy, and he just so happens to start chewing it on my foot, and it's like, oh. What you got there, Gizmo? And then it's like, we're tug of warring it and stuff. And we keep doing that until he falls asleep.
Yes. More dog content, more Gizmo content, please.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Dog is really nice.
Is that like another sort of distress tolerance sort of thing there? Like, does that help with, talking about community, like hanging out with friends? Like, are pets a therapeutic angle to help with some of the stuff too, I wonder? What do you think? There's got to be tons of research on that. That's probably maybe self-evident, but and maybe hitting on just one or two more of these elements of mental health when it comes to painting. Maybe we hit on a little bit of like maybe overcoming some of the anxiety pieces, or maybe getting started or burning out. What about like frustration while you're doing a miniature? Do you often feel, or does that feeling arise where you're painting miniature, you're like, man, I'm really frustrated, this didn't work out, maybe anger, maybe disappointment? Do you find that sometimes you have to give up on a miniature? Like, do you have strategies for working through that? You know, as someone who is a developing painter, I think might be the polite way to call my skills. You know, I watch your stuff and it's so good because it's video format. I've got some old like heavy metal Warhammer magazine, like painting throws from a kid, and it'd be like picture 1, like base color, picture 2, like a little bit more, and then it'd be like picture 3, done miniature. And I'm like, how the heck did we get there? And I can like watch your videos and like kind of go back and be like, okay, wait a second, one more time. Like, okay, here's how we do that. Or even seeing like, this is what 10 minutes takes, this is what an hour takes. Okay, great. Like I'm somewhere in this range. So, you know, that can still get frustrating though sometimes, where I'm like, you know, it's not even like not understanding the concept. It's like my adeptness with like moving my brush, or like the way the paint is like pooling up, and like, and that can be frustrating sometimes. And I can think there are maybe a lot of times there have been things where maybe larger vehicles have been hard, where like I gave up and like been like, it's really hard. I thought this big tank would be so easy, but like, this is the hardest thing I've had to paint, it feels like. And then, you know, sitting on it and sometimes coming back. I've got this Star Wars Legion, the LLAT, and I started it, and then I tried to do some paneling, and then it didn't work. And I'm like, I think I need to start over again. And I don't want to say that I've given up, but I'm in a temporary holding pattern. How do you deal with frustration, or does that arise for you? And how do you deal with that? Scott, is that something, I think you've talked about a little bit in the past, I've seen some videos, but like, you know, does that still manifest regularly, and what do you do?
Yeah. So before I was involved in YouTube, I would consider myself a pretty emotionally healthy person, pretty good ego and stuff like that. And how that manifests itself in my painting is that I tell myself, and maybe you tell yourself this when you're walking through the aisles of IKEA, it's like you see a piece of furniture and like, I can make that. I don't need to buy that, right? And so
Oh no!
When it comes to painting, right? I know, right? When it comes to painting, I tell myself I can paint like anyone in the world as long as I have the willingness and the time to spend. And I almost believe that entirely. There are people that I believe that are a little bit untouchable in their skill. But if I just sit down and I futz on something for a super long time, I can get it looking really good. And so if I'm ever at a point in my painting where I'm like, okay, I'm in the ugly phase of this model, it looks kind of trashy, I know that if I just sit here for another 3 hours, you know, however long it's going to take, depending on the size of the model, level of detail, things like that, it's going to look good. Because I've been here before. I've been in this bad place, and I know if I just paint more details, it'll look great. So I'm pretty good at powering through that, mostly due to an ego issue.
I've done I think the ugly phase. That is definitely a painting phase of mine. I've recently been trying to be like, you know, I'm going to try and do eyes. Like I'm going to figure this out. I have sat for 3 hours and it just doesn't. And I'm like, I have not made any progress. I am worse than, and they really can distort the feel of a miniature when you're like, I got everything how I want it, and then there's just a little bit Duncan, how about you? Does, you know, frustration and maybe giving up, does that come up in your practice?
I certainly understand the ugly phase bit of things. I find sometimes when I'm painting a model, and I've got so I'll be funny with my tanks actually for my Flames of War, that I've got a number of them that I've finished and I'm painting some new ones. And there's some stages where I've just painted the armor, for example, and I compare that to one that's finished and they look really different. And I'm like, have I done something wrong with this? If I carry on, is it going to look really different in the end? And it's because of like the breaking up of the colors on it and the weathering and stuff. But it's definitely a point where I have to like go, no, you know it's going to turn out all right. Keep going. Because otherwise I'd just be there doing the first stage again and again and again and not working out why it never carried on the same. So yeah, that's a good like thing to just be aware of, I think. As for giving up on models, I've never willingly gone, forget this, and just given up completely. But I have been, there's been plenty of times where I've been painting a model and then something's happened where I've had to turn my attention to do that thing instead. And I just never end up coming back to what I'd started. So on my like my French Napoleonics, for example, so I've got this unit of light cavalry, and I was so I think they're cool and everything, but then the Perry's brought out a plastic version where I think the plastic horses are nicer than the metal ones. And so I decided I'm going to change all the metal horses because they're very thin, right? So they look fine looking side on. When you look at them close up, it looks a bit too thin for my eye. So take them off the old metal horse, put on the plastic one. I got through 3 and then something happened. And then I ended up playing a game a few weeks ago. And I realized I'd not finished doing that. It's like a real they all look different now. that drives me crazy. So yeah, that's a thing I do. I get distracted and I forget about it. I don't like that about myself.
Yeah. So I don't want to put you like I don't want to call you out at all, Duncan, but how many, if you could approximate, how many ongoing projects do you have? Whether that's like I define a project as something that you are painting as one thing. So if you're painting an entire army in one go, that's one project or one model. How many ongoing projects do you got?
All right. Start count. All right. So my Flames of War. And yeah, it's not started yet, but I'm going to do another army for that. But I've got my Elder Scrolls collection. I've got with Ice and Fire. Does that all like loosely count as one? Or are we talking about the different factions?
I would say a faction is one project.
Yeah, a non-specific number between 1 and 7 is
Oh boy. Okay, so
or is that a non-zero number? It's a non-zero number.
Yeah, it's quite. Yeah, I've got quite a few. So I was going to do the Unsullied theme army for my Targaryens. So there's one. I've got the Clegane theme tag to my Lannisters. I've got the Greyjoy box, of which I've painted a few of the models, so I suppose that counts. Then there's going to be plenty more. I've nearly finished painting my Cthulhu Death May Die set. I've got these Xenomorphs I started painting. Yeah. So I've got some Romans I started doing. I've got some Greeks I started doing. Some Vikings. We're going to be here a while. Oh, I've got some Enforcers, some Chaos Space Marines, Conquest of a human army, the Wadran army. There's quite a lot. I was sort of not worry about those. So 2 at a time, right?
Right. That's the new rule for both of us. Yes.
Is going to be finish my Cthulhu Death May Die and my Flames of War. That's what I should do because those 2 projects are close to being finished.
Okay.
I'll be a good boy and try and do those.
Oh, how about you, Scott? Is that
yeah,
you got a similar number? Does that sound reasonable what he's going through?
That is 100% reasonable. I have a very similar amount of ongoing painting projects.
Does that help manage? Like, it's like not giving up, but it's just like rotating from one thing to another. Like, in Alta, I don't know if maybe some of this is resonating as they're going through here, but like dealing with getting frustrated, maybe switching to different projects that are like adjacent or similar. I don't know. Are there any maybe skills that might be applicable to helping us navigate this space more skillfully?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by how you 2 have, it sounds like a pretty parallel process where you have over time experimented a ton and have kind of learned to trust the process. And like many of us, it sounds like there's periods as you are painting something where you start to be self-critical. And that for you 2, you can like recognize that and be like, okay, yes. And I can trust this process. And I know, because I've experimented with this before, that doesn't mean that it's not worth continuing.
Absolutely. It's always interesting to hear someone who isn't in the hobby's perspective on how you engage in your hobby, because it just opens so many doors and so much realization. So thank you, Alta. I really appreciate your perspective. But yeah, I don't even remember what the question was.
And yeah, so I mean, I think about the particular, trying to think of like skills. Like, one thing in the back of my mind as we're going through this is like, how can we be more skillful? Like, are there tools that we could maybe implement in our process? Like, it sounds like through trial and error, you guys figured out like, this is how it works. Or maybe, I don't know, you read like a book on like the best way to become a YouTube mini painter or something. If not, like, I'm just hearing it sounds like there's room for a book to be in there. But speaking of burnout, we don't want to go there, but you found it through like trial and error, right? And, hitting on these ideas of burnout, it sounds like through the process, maybe you've been in that place where it's like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it here, or that you've had projects when you've been really frustrated and maybe you've not given up, but you cycle through other projects to keep it kind of fresh. And then throughout all of this, like it was maybe the joy, getting back to your values and the friendships, the social component, even if like maybe you don't see yourself as like the most extroverted or social person, depending on individual. But that piece of like sharing your hobby, that joy or experience somehow has been reinvigorating. So maybe there's like things we need to be thinking about, like that we can reinforce or double down, or maybe even do more skillfully in those regions that help sustain our own mental health and make this hobby like something that is a sustaining and nurturing and invigorating thing versus like a drain.
Yeah. I definitely have some thoughts about that. But you can go first, Duncan.
Oh, thank you. I think, so I never really thought about any of this kind of stuff as all this began, because for me, I was working in Games Workshop Studio, and my job was to paint armies for them. So the willingness as to whether you wanted to do it or not didn't really factor in, because you had to do it because you had a deadline and you're expected to reach these things. And so I realized then that the main thing about painting the army in that sort of way is having the willpower to commit and keep going through. Even like once you're done, you just hand it over and it's not yours anymore. It's like, it's just you spending your time doing it. At that time, the only army I really painted at any sort of size or degree and stuck with was my Bretonian army, just because I really liked them. I ended up doing a campaign and stuff like that. But that was my thing. When the TV thing started, again, it sort of switched over as the job is to help people do this thing. But I always loved unlocking secrets for people and showing them directly what to do. And actually then meeting people who would learn from it, I found to be a really powerful thing. So that's what really sort of really got me invested in that. But when it came to painting armies, it's always been having a thing that grabs my attention and keeps me going all the way through it. So it's kind of been like two separate things in a way. Over time, what I think doing this kind of thing gives you a perspective, because people do start coming to you with issues and things. And it even happened in retail, actually, when I was working there. People look to you as kind of, it sounds weird, they look to you like an authority or something, like a role model. And so I think you start hearing things and getting a perspective that you don't necessarily get, that I was getting when I was just painting my own army and playing with people. When people come to you about saying, oh, I'm having this issue or burnout, or I do this thing and it's frustrating, or this kind of thing. I think that then sort of makes you reflective on your own experiences and what you're trying to do, and recognizing when something is possibly like a toxic behavior in yourself, and adapting to it. So I don't think it's anything that I ever particularly intended going into this sort of thing. I think it's just sort of happened. And then after leading Games Workshop and being in YouTube, it's just kind of, I've just been dropped into the situation, I guess, and sort of had this perspective on things. I'm curious if, Scott, if your process through this has been much different, because you've been through the YouTube thing. Whereas the company was literally putting me in that position. And so I was doing that job, but I was never really thinking about this sort of thing, until all of a sudden one day I met people in real life and it's like, oh, this has happened. Was yours much different to that? Like, did it just sort of grow, or like naturally, or?
Yeah. So I want to address something immediately. I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it kind of sounds like you're suggesting a little bit of a feeling of an imposter syndrome, like because you had this more corporate approach to being a YouTuber, maybe it's like lesser than. And I just want to reassure you that YouTube thing with Warhammer and GW would have never worked if you as the individual weren't like just a lovely person to interact with and like a great face for the company. Because like half of it, sure, they have an audience, but like it doesn't go anywhere if the person isn't like fun to engage with. So like I think our experiences are going to be super similar in that a lot of what shapes it is how you kind of interact with the community and how the community interacts with you. So yeah, you mentioned something where someone comes up to you and explains an issue they're having in their personal hobby life. And you're like, I've kind of experienced that too. And you almost identify it as, you call it a toxic trait in your own life. Definitely had the exact same experiences. Someone comes up and it's like, okay, I'm struggling with this portion of the model. And it's like, I've been there too. And you can kind of advise through that. or you even realize that it's a problem in your own hobby life because they are bringing it up to you and they view it as an issue. So yeah, definitely similar experiences there. And then Chase was kind of like asking, he said that we kind of figured out this process. We have so many ongoing projects and that's almost intentional, and absolutely is not intentional.
I got the wrong message. Whoops.
I mean, part of it, so I've heard this thing before, and maybe Alta can confirm or deny this, where you have a cool idea for a video and then you like share it with someone and it almost feels like you're doing it. And so an example of that, I have a notoriety for being into the color hot pink. And so I went out and I bought a bunch of hot pink fluorescent paints to do a fun kind of jokey comparison between them. The box of hot pink colors is still in my closet and I still want to do it, but like I have much less motivation to do it because I kind of told my audience about it and they're like, oh, that's cool. And it's like, okay, I almost got the feeling of success because they liked the idea. I'm good now. Now I don't need to do it. And that goes to my second point where it's when you have an ongoing project and you share it with someone, they ask about it. They're like, where is it? Is it done yet? Have you finished it? And it's like, I can't. So that is another kind of feeling of negativity, but yeah, definitely not intentional. And I think because I share it, it makes me less inclined to actually finish it.
That's such an interesting pattern that you've noticed. It makes me think of, there's some work looking at like vacation, and actually like the act of like thinking about a vacation and being like, ooh, like I could go to Hawaii and like these are the things that I could do is just as satisfying as going on the trip. Right? It sounds like that's similar to this idea of like you have this idea and you share it with people, you get feedback, and that is satisfying in and of itself.
But does the satisfaction then it maybe undermine the ability to produce then, right? So
absolutely,
that makes a sort of weird spot then though. Is it like, is the idea then to deny yourself, satisfaction in order to be more productive? Is it some sort of like, I gotta make my, like, where does like the sort of middle path, like where does contentment come into all of this, whether it's painting or miniatures and content creation for us? Like, I guess I'm not actually trying to think about even like now, like, am I content with my miniature collection? Like I spent a lot of time thinking about how to get more miniatures and paint them. But like, is that my vacation? Like, God, this is maybe disclosing a little bit, but man, when I was a kid, I recently had my closet, there was a leak and I had to move all my hobby stuff out and it was super, super bummer. But I went through and as a result, I was looking through some really old stuff I hadn't looked at. When I was a kid, when I had a 1997 Games Workshop product catalog, and when things were really tough, I remember like grabbing that and I would like flip through it and just look at like the pictures of miniatures to buy. And I would just like tell myself stories about the fun I'd have with them, or like even just like stories in the universe. And it has this like cool Blood Angels, like a chaplain on the cover of it. And I was looking, and I was like, this out of all the White Dwarf magazines, this was the one that like was worn the most. And I was like, man, I spent so much time thinking about like, and I didn't buy a lot of miniatures as a kid. My disposable income was rather limited, but it was the promise of this thing. And I now I'm just like kind of maybe weirdly wondering like, oh man, am I just doing that again? Like, except now I have money and I can like buy a cool Star Wars spaceship or get some Napoleonic linemen. And now I'm trying to figure out like, where is the joy in the hobby? Because I would have said it's like, it's the playing the games with friends and then maybe the painting, but maybe it's also the purchasing. Like, is it the chasing of this elusive thing? Is it the vacation idea? I did play a game recently where I sat down and the game was not so fun, but the painting the miniatures and collecting them was maybe more fun. I mean, I don't know, where is the content in the hobby? And I guess that maybe lands differently for everybody, but I'm assuming that you guys spend more time hobbying than playing, considering how much time content creation makes. Like, do you feel when you sit in the play, is that the best part? Like, or sorry, I know. So I just have like a moment here where I'm like,
it's quite a big question.
But I think, yeah, Duncan, what part of the hobby maybe stands out to you the most? Like, is there a spot when you're most content?
I think so I'm always kind of chasing. So I've got memories of games and things I've played in the past, where it really comes to life, and it's just really happy memories. And I think I'm always sort of chasing making more of those memories. So, for example, like one of my best experience in all miniature gaming was when I ran this Warhammer Fantasy campaign. So we played it over a year. Every month was a turn, and the seasons would change over the course of it. And I made a big 3D map for it, and got everyone to make little markers for their armies and stuff, so they could see what it were. And we all had, I got everyone to name their nation that they were fighting for and stuff. And over the course of it, everyone started painting up new miniatures and new characters and things, and we all started interacting. It became a bit like a role-playing game. Like even where people were writing letters to each other, and like organizing betrayals and all this sort of stuff. It was brilliant. And I can remember, so one of my characters got killed by an ogre really early on. And so I brought in a new character who was his son and was sworn vengeance. And so his quest was to find this guy. And eventually, like many months later, he caught and captured him. And it's like, well, now I'm going to gloat about it. So I'm going to do a joust and invite all the players to come to this joust. And so, because I dug out these old rules for playing this jousting thing in Warhammer, and I was playing as Bretonian, so that's obviously what I do, right? And so I set up this scenario where I taught them all how to play this little game, and I made everything for it, and had like, all of it arranged, and all the peasants there, and all this kind of stuff. And as part of it, this ogre breaks out, and it turns into a big free-for-all, and all this kind of thing. And it was just a really fun experience. And like that is, I think, when I'm feeling content, it's when it's that sort of narrative thing. About other ones where one of my guys got captured, and so I had the old Robin Hood figure, the Bertrand Librigand for my army. So they did a daring Prince of Thieves style rescue in this castle to go and liberate the guy. There was another one, a 40k one, where it was like a big again arena sort of thing, and everyone had to work together to get out of it from the evil lord and this big skull thrown of death. It's these things, I think, and these experiences with friends, that's what I want to keep doing. So all the miniatures I'm painting are kind of with that sort of goal in mind, I think. Whether I get to do these things as often as I'd want to, I don't think I do. But that's for my personal hobby. It's always like aimed with that sort of thing in mind. When it comes to the content creation, it's for me, it's someone doing the thing that I've shown them how to do in a video. And if they do it and they're really happy with it and it looks great, that's like all the content. Driving goal for me is teaching people to do that thing. That's the most important thing. If they can do that thing, then I've earned my paycheck. So all the stuff that's surrounding it is all, to me, like a bit of a haze and like a strange side effect of it. But if I show somebody how to paint a face or like do whatever technique, and then they do it and they get it and they're like, I feel really good because I did that thing, and I feel really good about that. I feel content in that way.
I have a question for you that might be a little difficult to answer. Do you feel like if your job and the work it requires never changes, that you would be able to recreate that campaign experience again ever in your life?
Yes, I think I can. Everyone's lives have kind of changed, and people, like things do change, obviously, as people grow older, people have families and stuff like that. So being in that unique set of circumstances where we had that time to put into it, it's quite a difficult thing. I would like to do it again, and I hope I can. I guess I'm hopeful for it. I think it's possible.
I mean, yeah, It sounds awesome. Like just describing it, it was like, I don't even think I'd have the creativity to make it as cool as you were sounding, but it sounds awesome. And I would love that. But I had a realization in a podcast recently that I was recording with my co-host, John. And I was like, when I was a 12-year-old and I was playing Middenheim and we were doing Storm of Chaos, all I did for a year straight was paint Middenheim models. And that was what I did. That was my thing. I can't really have a thing anymore, I can't work on a table of terrain for 6 months. I can't work on a Mordheim warband for however long, because people aren't going to be interested in seeing the same thing over and over and over again for a year. And that is the time that I have to work on that, is like, while I work for YouTube. And so it's like, how do you find that contentment that Chase is talking about, those things you really want to do while also doing your job the right way?
That's really interesting that you meant. So with the Flame to War thing, that's the one project I've committed to for quite a while in the same level. But then I also realized that those miniatures are way easier to paint and way faster to paint than anything else that's like 28 mil. Like I can power through painting a unit of tanks in a weekend, like a whole platoon of a company's worth of tanks in a weekend. So it's so easy to paint. But when you talk about in terms of content creation, if that's all I'm putting up on Instagram, well, no, I think people will get bored of it because it's kind of the same colors all the time, isn't it? So that is a tricky thing to get around. So when you put in that light, I don't know. I mean, if I spent a year painting Bretonians and making castles and stuff like that, I think people would enjoy the novelty of it early on because it's kind of, it's a bit retro and stuff. But yeah, after 3 months, like, come on, I can paint something else. I wonder. I don't really know. It's a very interesting thought.
It's kind of sad, isn't
it? How do you deal with the morning?
Way, but I mean, there is a bit of a distinction for me between my hobby and the work stuff, because the work thing is all right. So the new thing is, I don't know, a space marine, and people want to know how to paint that space marine or that color or a thing for that. Sure, I can do a video showing them how to do that sort of thing. That's cool. But then in my own time, I can go and paint something else. How much that can be used to promote the brand, I guess I don't really know. So I suck at thinking about this kind of stuff. I think that's what I mean about how because I did this for a job for Games Workshop. That was the promotion every day, especially the daily videos when we're doing these little things. It's like we're showing someone how to do their thing, but I always have my own thing at the same time, and it would never be the same thing as what I was doing for work. It would always be like, in fact, for a large part of it, I was painting that French Napoleonic army, which of course never showed because I was working for Games Workshop, right? And so that wouldn't go down well. And I was fine with that because it was like my own thing away from the public eye. And I still do think about things a lot in that way. And I always have to remind myself, I should probably show people what I've been painting because people might be interested in seeing it. But I have to consciously remember that and make myself do it. It's not like a natural thing. Like I'm taking photos of everything I'm doing and just putting it on social media. I don't know. I mean, I could start doing that sort of thing. It feels a bit forced. So I don't know. I'm not very good at promoting my brand.
Yeah. I mean, you're a polite British person. I totally get it. See, me, I'm just like, whatever I put paint on is going on the internet. I don't care.
Well, a part of me thinks why would anyone care what I'm painting at the weekend? Are they more interested in what they're painting?
I care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just how I think about it, I guess. I don't know if it's good for someone in my position to think that way, but it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah.
Sounds like the drive to be productive all the time can really, that it's really hard to straddle that and balance doing the projects that you want to do that might be maybe less exciting to a broader audience and doing your job.
That is definitely true. It's definitely true. If I want to paint, so I arrived the other day was a packet of Norman Knights from a company called Dick's Tricks, and I really like Norman Knights. I think they look great, but I think more people want to see Space Marines. So it is about Scott. How would you? What would your if you weren't worrying so much about the content, you could just do the thing that you wanted to do? What would it be?
I would definitely, at this moment, do a heavily converted warband of something. I see so many people on the internet that I could cite right now that make very awesome converted, very thoughtful, small groups of miniatures that are thematic and look so cool and are so unique. And I have no idea how to do sculpting and things like that. So it would require a bit of a learning period that would be awkward and would look bad. And so, yeah, I would love to do that right now. Other things, it's just I'd love to do really, really complicated videos. Like you mentioned this year-long campaign that was narratively driven. I'd love to make a TV show out of that, which would require involvement from producers and employees and gear rental and all of these things. I would love to do that. But I have no idea what the first step into doing that. It requires employees and stuff like that. So yeah, I mentioned earlier how I enjoy the video aspect as well as the painting aspect, and that's how it manifests itself as big projects in both of those worlds.
Well, I think, we hit on a lot of stuff there, and I really appreciate you guys exploring these topics and kind of just sharing that these are things like, we're all humans, and it's kind of fun for me hearing hearing your perspective on things. And I know maybe perhaps sometimes people put you up on pedestals, but you have the same struggles and tribulations, and there are some unique things that change the nature of painting and how the interaction with mental health is, because content creation really adds a different dynamic. And I know a lot to think about here, and maybe process and think down the line. When it comes to maybe mental health and Alta as like the kind of outside perspective on the hobby and some of the things that were talked about today, are there any maybe threads or themes that you picked up on, and anything that we want to keep in mind as a takeaway from the conversation?
Yeah, please diagnose us.
Yes. Okay.
There's
Brace yourself.
so many things. I mean, no, it's all good things.
So it's not, that's good. So it's not just for Scott. Be like, listen, it's just for Scott. Here we go.
You're screwed up.
No, but it's so cool getting to hear how you've all learned to navigate these situations. And one of the things that's so fun for me is I get to hear these strategies and then map them onto like our therapy speak, right? So I'm hearing about y'all like doing these experiments, which I would be like, oh, behavioral experiments, that's a really important therapeutic strategy. Or like, I had to write some of this down because I was like, there's so many things. But like recognizing thoughts, like when y'all were talking about how like those self-critical thoughts of the ugly period, like recognizing those thoughts in and of itself is a skill, and then choosing how you want to respond, right? Like if you want to challenge it by doing like what Duncan was saying, like looking at another model and being like, okay, I know this looked like that at some point, so that's like important evidence for me to consider here. Or by just kind of letting those thoughts like, play in the background like a TV that's like on in the room and doing what you need to do. So it's just really fun getting to hear all of these different strategies and the strengths that y'all have. I think the other main takeaway for me is just like how normal these challenges are. Like, being human, like these things are just a part of life. And I think it's great getting to hear all of the different ways that you learn to cope with that and the things that still pop up for you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think the idea too of like the change for me, the early on it resonated with the burnout thing, and it sounds like it comes and goes, like, and it will probably arrive again. There'll be other periods of burnout, and it's like, oh yeah, I see that in my own life, and it's maybe helpful to think that these are cycles, maybe, and we can be skillful, and maybe things that nurture us in those times, whether it's social communities or parasocial communities, like tapping into people's video content or other online communities, maybe helping us navigate forward, and maybe being sometimes maybe a little bit of kindness in how we talk about it, our own process. Even I can hear like even myself like creeping in when it's like expectations of like how much content to make or how fast, and there are deadlines, and there are, for you guys this is a job, and like what makes your content both so great is how so much of you is in that, and it doesn't often come across as a job. It seems like you're generally putting yourself into each of these pieces of content you make, and that does sustain other people. And I think going back, originally I was talking about like, hey, I'll sit down and listen to your content, and that is like, it's relaxing, it's calming, it's motivating and inspiring, and oftentimes it's a good laugh, whether it's a pug or a really interesting spoof for OnlyFans, which I haven't showed you yet. But Scott, we're gonna wait for. Well, I didn't want to scare you too much there, but it's just it's just it definitely impacts a lot of people, and I don't know if you put that together when you see a little counter go up on your video, and it's like there's another +1 view on this. That's like a person that's life has been impacted, and possibly in that way, in a time when maybe it's really important for them to be seeing stuff like this and helping them get through their regular day, and sitting down at the painting table. So kind of a thank you for all that you do, even though I know it's like incredibly hard. I do a little bit of video stuff and it's hard. So I look at you guys like, wow, oh my gosh, day in and day out.
It's the same challenges. I mean, like the things that you're struggling with right now, Chase, are the same things that we're struggling with. So like, yeah, don't feel like because we do it for a job, it's really any different. Sitting down, doing that editing, doing that painting, or any of it, doing that writing.
Yeah.
All the struggles are all the same. The effort is all the same. So yeah, you're right there with us.
Well, and thank you so much for coming on and taking your time out of your day. I know you guys both have very busy schedules, and we're spread over quite a few time zones here. So thanks for either waking up early in Seattle, Alta, or Duncan over there in England as it's getting dark. And
yes, we're getting darker throughout all this.
and you know, hopefully maybe at some point we got to get some Song of Ice and Fire games in here. I think I want to see some Greyjoys versus Lannisters. That would be a fun time, I think. You know?
I would love that. I would love that so much.
Maybe
yeah, that'd be so much fun.
Can you make a King's tournament, maybe some jousting rules too, to have a side thing in the background with all the infinite time, you know, when Duncan finishes making those castles. What was it, a year, he said?
yeah.
I have, so in the UK, there's a shop called Waterstones, right? It's a bookshop, but in there, they always have this section that's got board games and things, and they always have a jigsaw puzzle of Westeros. And it's got like 3D castles and things you can put on it, and it's all divided into the segments of the territory. Now, every time I go in, I'm like, that'd make a really good campaign map.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, if I glued that down.
That's
a few little tokens for armies moving along. Start it just like at the start of Game of Thrones, at the start of the War of the Five Kings, and just see what happens.
All right. And finally,
please invite me.
The free folk will conquer all. Mance, that's the plot twist. Mance is going to become,
there you go. Yeah.
It's all about him all along. It was the free folk. But on that being said, you know, thanks so much again for coming on here. And for those listening, let us know your thoughts in the comments below if certain things resonated. And, you know, in the meantime, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.